I was waiting for that. Start the meeting by acknowledging the 30 First Nation communities that live and reside in the area we now call the Fraser Valley Regional District, where we live, work, and learn. Important decisions that we make here at this table can affect First Nation communities and Indigenous peoples in a great many ways. So as part of our collective responsibility, we continually to examine the work we do to ensure that our projects, plans, and initiatives are guided by the principles of inclusion, collaboration, and reconciliation. So with that in mind, I'd like to call the meeting to order. This February 23rd, 2023 meeting of the Fraser Valley Regional District. First item.
Looking for approval of the agenda and late items.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. It's moved by Director Facio, second by Director Pranger. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor, opposed if any. Item carries. Next item.
Item 4.1 is upcoming changes to ECOM 911. We have a presentation this afternoon.
Thank you, Ms. Kinnaman. And I had actually asked Director Mercer, this board will recall that it was on his initiative that we invite ECOM here. And I wasn't actually sure I was going to be here to do the welcome. So I'd just like to pass this over to Director Mercer to welcome our delegation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I like many of us, perhaps, I sat in on at the UBCM in late fall and listened to the ECOM presentation, and it didn't take long through the presentation to strike me that there'd be value in having something similar done for the regional district for us all. Afterwards, I did meet with Stephen Thatcher informally, and he did offer to come and speak with us tonight. And I'm so happy that Ms. Kinnaman and staff were able to put that together. I think I'd be doing them a disservice and maybe some comfort for the regional district by actually introducing them and telling you a little bit about them both. Julie, I was afraid I was going to introduce you and you wouldn't be here, but welcome. We obviously go way back. In April 2022, Julie DeDecker was hired as the Director of Operations Relations Management, which reports directly to the VP of Operation for ECOM. Julie retired from the RCMP in 22. Didn't sound right as I said it. As the Superintendent Corporate and Client Services for the Lower Mainland for the province of British Columbia. During her 29 years, Julie held a number of operational support administrative roles. She's worked in frontline policing, federal policing, leadership and training, operational strategy, and held the position of the BC RCMP Government Liaison Officer. She finally moved to the Lower Mainland District, where I understand she did work with Stephen, who I'll introduce next. Her familiarity with the role and function of police services, part of the Ministry of Solicitor General, and her fluency in addressing overarching contract and service delivery issues with some 25 communities in the Lower Mainland District is invaluable to her role and director as the Operations Relationship Manager. Stephen Thatcher, Vice President, Operations Emergency Communications for the Province of British Columbia Incorporated, more formally known as ECOM 911 or simply ECOM. It's the first point of contact for 911 callers in 25 regional districts in British Columbia, handling over 1.8 million 911 calls a year. Which accounts for about 99% of BC's 911 call volume. ECOM also provides dispatch services for police, fire, and operates the largest multi-jurisdiction, tri-service wide area radio network in the province used by police, fire, and ambulance personnel through Metro Vancouver and parts of the Fraser Valley. But about Stephen. Stephen joined in ECOM after a 29 career in the RCMP, during which he served at various ranks in a variety of operational support administrative roles. In his last role in the RCMP, he was our RCMP Lower Mainland District Commander, and many of you might have met him in that capacity. As the commander of the Lower Mainland, he had a team of 3,500 employees in delivering service through 13 detachments, 5 integrated teams, and oversaw frontline policing needs for approximately 2 million citizens in 28 communities. Don't be disappointed, but he is a lawyer with corporate and client and criminal law experience prior to his policing career. He's presented right across the country. I know that personally. Stephen has a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Toronto, a law degree from British Columbia, and is a member of the Law Society of BC. So, folks, we're in great hands, and it's always good when you've got frontline operational people that come up through the ranks, so to speak, and end up being decision makers, because their decisions are always backstopped by operational experience and what actually works on the front line. So with that, Stephen, welcome. Julie, welcome. And the floor is yours.
Well, Councillor Mercer, thank you very much for that warm introduction. I'm feeling taller. My head's a little heavier than it was a few seconds ago, but I will try to deliver. I will say thank you for the invitation to speak to you today on the topic of 911. I'm particularly grateful that you've chosen a day in which the weather is fine. It's been Saturday with the snow. I'd probably be doing this remotely, so thank you for a nice spell. It's also nice to be out this way. I don't get out this way very often anymore, but it's been a pleasure to see the environs again. And as Bud noted, a couple of familiar faces, so thank you. I'm going to do most of the presentation today. Julie, I brought along to correct me when I go off the tracks. She's very good at that, let me tell you. So you will hear comments as required. You're quickly going to see there's absolutely no flow to this presentation. So should you have questions, depending on what your protocol is for this committee, if you'd like to ask questions as they arise, but I'm obviously going to be deferential to whatever your process is.
Actually, I was just going to say your 10 minutes is actually up because we used it on your intro there in the bio. Sorry.
I will do what my daughter does and speak very, very quickly. So
You've got time.
Today is really going to be 911, and I thought I'd start by simply sort of leading you through the agenda. It's very, very light in some respects, but there are a lot of details that you might wish to cross-examine us on. I'm familiar with that role as a cross-examinee as well. Talk about 911 call volume, average handle time, and performance. We'll talk about the 2023 911 call answer agreements for the two components of 911 for the Fraser Valley Regional District. And I'd like to spend most of my time, if I can, talking about next generation 911, the next generation of 911 technology that will add extraordinary capacity to the NG 911 system and be of great benefit to first responders and overall to public safety. All right, just to make sure, oopsie, this is going faster than, all right. I had a slide in the original deck. This is amended a little bit, so it's to throw me off, but I just wanted to say, to make sure that we're on the same page, I want to talk about what 911 is. 911 is those three magic digits that anybody in most parts of the province can call to get assistance from a fire department, a police department, or the BC Ambulance Service. And I say most of the province because, amazingly enough, there's considerable tracts of this province, geographically speaking, that don't have what we call 911 system. They'll have a 10-digit number to call your local ambulance, your local police department, or your local fire service. But the truth is that 99% of 911 calls placed in this province are actually handled by ECOM on behalf of regional districts like yours, which have a legal obligation to provide that 911 service in jurisdictions where it's going to be available. So just to give you some quick stats overall for the province, we've been handling 911 calls since the late 1990s, 1999, as a matter of fact. We picked up that work from Metro Vancouver. In the past year, we've handled the 2022 just over 2.1 million calls across the province. And really, the function of 911 is to do the following. Where are you calling from? Where do you need service? And what service do you need? Those conversations tend to be very short. They're very to the point. They are very expensive to service. We have a service level target of answering 95% of 911 calls within 5 seconds or less. Generally, we do it in under 4, and then our obligation is to downstream it to the next agency. What that means is if you were to come and visit our center in the Lower Mainland, which I invite you all to do, you'll see some people knitting, some people doing card games on their computers. They're waiting for the phone to ring, but they need to be there so that when that phone does ring for those 3 little digits, there's somebody who can promptly answer the phone. So one of our jobs is to make sure that that ratio is properly balanced, that we're delivering that 95.5 service delivery, but we're not making the costs exorbitant to meet it. So this is service levels for British Columbia over the last 10 years. And you can see that we've done very, very well in maintaining our service performance. That blue line is the actual service delivery. The dotted line is where that service delivery should be. What you will see is that rather nasty V in 2021. And I think all of you are aware of what were the drivers. So we had the heat dome, we had fires, we had a shortage of not just BC ambulance crews, but BC ambulance call takers. And what that meant in consequence was that our people picking up the 911 calls could not downstream those calls to the ambulance service. They were stuck basically on hold, waiting for an ambulance service provider to pick up, which meant that our whole system across the province backed up. So after some work with BC Ambulance Service, we were able to get them to increase aspects of their technological capacity to hold calls. We worked on a new triaging system, which allowed us to downstream calls to them in two streams, those that were urgent and those that were not so urgent. And they did a heroic effort of upstaffing. And you can see that in the end of 2021 and into 2022, those performance numbers have recovered. That was partly a heavy lift by ECOM staff, but we worked very closely with the BC Ambulance Service to return that. And the reason I mention that is this. When our call takers were tied up on the phone waiting for an ambulance operator to pick up, it means they could not take in incoming calls. So if we had a building on fire, an active shooting scenario, something that was a much greater risk to public safety than the person waiting with a broken ankle to be picked up by the ambulance service. So we had to find a way through that bottleneck. And that was the way in which that particular challenge was addressed and resolved. So other than quarters 3 and 4, realistically, of 2021, our performance has been maintained. It is a little bit more expensive now as a result of certain changes that we made. And you can see that this is sort of the data projected differently in terms of call volume. And again, it's a little bit perplexing when you're first looking at it. But the bit that I will highlight for you is those two V's. The one on the top chart that kind of dips in the 2021, and the one on the bottom chart, that blue arrow that peaks up. Those are and should be relatively complementary. That's the average handle time that it took BC Ambulance to answer the calls. The longer they took, the longer handle time we had. And that handle time is one of our major metrics for driving cost. We try to proportion our cost on two major variables. One is the number of calls coming in, and that seems obvious. But the second thing is how long it takes our call handlers to answer the call, determine the nature of the emergency, determine which agency it's to be downstream to, and then to wait for the agency picking up that call to answer the phone. In the vast majority of instances, even through challenging times, certainly the police agencies and the fire departments have been pretty good at picking up the phone. The BC Ambulance Service, for the reasons I've outlined earlier, not so much. They have, as I said, done sterling work, and we are largely back to service levels that are consistent with historical performance. Oops. What we did, as I said, at the end of 2021, realizing that we needed to make some dramatic change, was basically give our staff the discretion to what we call cold transfer. In other words, they no longer had to wait on the line with a caller while an agent for the downstream agency picked up the phone. If the matter met certain criteria, they had the discretion to simply park it in the BC Ambulance System phone network and be off the line and able to take the next call. That was not a decision made unilaterally by ECOM. We did it in consultation with the BC Ambulance Service. We made sure that critical cases that were going to make a difference to the patient, whether they were responded to quickly, were triaged properly, and that the non-urgent, non-critical matters could be set aside for slightly slower call handling. We came up with protocols for denotifying the ambulances by email rather than by phone call, trying to drop the level of traffic that phone operators were required. So the number of steps that we took in order to rebound that, and you can see that. But for a few periods since the end of 2021, the call handle time on the BC Ambulance has been very, very good. We've missed our service level a couple of months in that. Those are not so much BC Ambulance related anymore. They're related to certain environmental concerns. So there'd be storms, windstorms, snowstorms, landslides, the floods that occurred in 2021 and 22. All of those are drivers for 911 traffic. So like most people, we have a certain capacity. We do try to project what service requirements are going to be on a month-by-month basis well ahead into the following year. But certainly drivers like environment, major events, sporting events can sometimes drive call handling a little bit higher than we would like to see it. But by the most part, we're fairly good at projecting what our requirements are going to be and how they're going to be met. We're not perfect. If you look at these last couple of years of forecasts versus actuals, you'll see a couple of trends. First of all, you'll see that our projections and the actual year-end volumes are close often, with variances up or down in a given month, but they're generally not bad. And you'll also see that overall year over year, with the exception of 2020, which was an odd aberrational year because of COVID, call volumes went down, but every other year since, those numbers have been rising. And one of the things we look at in terms of staffing and metrics and pricing is, all right, by how much do we think the call volume will go up? How will our handle time be affected? And there are multiple influences there. It's not just the nature of the call, it's the juniorness of our call taking staff. The more junior they are, the less experienced, they take a little bit more time. And again, we are dependent to a certain extent in meeting our own performance levels on the ability of the downstream agencies to handle the traffic that's destined for them. So maybe I'll pause there and see if there are any questions before I go on to sort of the next segment.
Questions, Director Barkman?
Just a question on, because it seems quite regularly on the news, the BC ambulance service comes up. Are their calls stacked according to the severity of why they're phoning in, a broken arm versus, I don't know, something else? How does ECOM deal with that?
So the BC Ambulance Service has given us a list of 7 symptoms, which if callers are complaining about are priority, and the rest can go into the non-priority queue. So we do a little bit of a triage. It's very basic. Our staff are not medically trained, which BC ambulance staff are. So ours are really reactionary. If a patient says I'm having chest pains, that's one of the queues that goes into the high priority queue for the BC Ambulance Service. If they say I've fallen down and broken my ankle, that's a low priority matter, and that will be dealt with usually by parking the call until somebody with the BC Ambulance Service can get a hold of it, and then our call taker will hang up and move on to the next matter. If it's a life-threatening matter, our call handlers are always on the line till the BC Ambulance Service picks up. I'll just add one more detail. There is a recording that callers on hold with the BC Ambulance Service get, and it says, if your circumstances change, if your symptoms become more severe, hang up, dial 911 again, and we'll go through the same triage system. And then when that system is handled by BC EHS, they perform their own triage, but their triage is medically based.
Okay, don't see any other questions. Just check in online. I don't see any hands raised. I think we're good to go. Continue on.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. So, bit of background. Julie and I were scrambling a little bit late this afternoon just to wrap our head around something that we knew existed, but had never really had to confront quite as directly. And that's this. Fraser Valley Regional District actually has 2 911 contracts with ECOM. There are historic reasons for that are explicable in terms of the era and the time and the way in which they developed, but nonetheless probably creates more bureaucracy for you that you don't need. And I know it creates more bureaucracy for me that I certainly don't need. And if you look at the background, it was partly as a result of 2 original PSAPs within the area that have now come together. They're still managed as separate contracts, even though there was an intention to blend those contracts. I think the time has come to continue that conversation about making one contract for all of 911 for the Fraser Valley Regional District. The question is, when is that time? And it's not this year. And I have a very specific reason for saying that. We have an agreements that have expired actually in 2022. Don't worry, we've continued to answer your phones and will continue to do so while we work out the contract negotiations. What I have basically recommended to regional staff is we continue basically with an extension of the agreements that have been in place for some years. We don't work too hard to modify it because, as you will hear in the next segment of our presentation, we are going to have to retool for next generation 911. Next generation 911 in basic principle is the same as the enhanced 911 system that we have now, with the ability to carry much more data, but it also comes with many more obligations on you as a regional district and your PSAPs, whether they're primary PSAPs, which answer those 911 calls, or what we call the secondary PSAPs, public safety answer points, that are your fire departments or your police service. Those obligations are going to add complexity, legal liability, and cost to your 911 program. And I'm very accustomed to being the bearer of bad news, and that is going to be my role a little bit later. But I always like to leave on an optimistic note. I do have a little bit of sunshine I think I can show on something at the very end. So we are in this situation where we're managing 2 contracts for 1 regional district. The numbers are slightly different. I'm going to show you some statistics based on one. I'll give you the pricing for the 2023 contracts for both. If you want data, more data, we can provide it. I just wanted, in the interest of brevity, to give you an insight into the sorts of data that we track, how we use it. If you've got any questions, you'll see that the two regional districts are actually fairly close in terms of call volume performance. And indeed, those numbers are fairly consistent across most regional districts in British Columbia for 911 service. So what's changed since we first entered into a contract in, I think it was 2013? Price increases. We at Ecom were not sufficiently diligent in my estimation. We watched the prices go up, but we didn't say, hey, regional districts, you need to pay a bit more. So now we're in a little bit of a game of catch up. 2021 really drove that point home. We invested heavily in overtime for our staff and adding extra bodies to shifts to make sure that we could, to the maximum extent possible, maintain that 95.5 service level through the heat dome and subsequent emergencies into the fall and indeed into the winter of 2021. That does not come for free, but we felt that it was necessarily in the interest of public safety. And most of our agreements have a true-up mechanism. We give you a forecast at the beginning of the year. At the end of the year, we look at what we actually did for you, and then we say you actually get a credit or a rebate, or we'd like to come after you for a little bit more money to make up the difference between what we actually had to deliver and what the forecast was. So you'll see that increase in average handling time in 2021 because of the ambulance transfer delays. The system that we currently have in place to handle those ambulance calls has added a couple of extra seconds to our baseline call handling time. So that I don't think is going to be changed anytime soon. It really is a byproduct of that messaging that I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, in which callers have to listen to a little longer message. And that's added a couple of extra seconds before our call takers can make sure that the message has been understood by the caller, and then they can ring off the line. So one of the drivers for cost increases is not just the obvious things that you would all know about: inflation, cost of labor going up, scarcity of labor. It's also the fact that we are having to take a little bit more time than we ordinarily would have historically in order to make sure those calls are properly handled. And we don't see that returning to our pre-COVID, pre-pandemic baseline for 911 ambulance. However, what we are trying to do is we're trying to increase our costs in a bit of a stepwise manner to make sure that we're not overly taxing you with sudden increases, but we're also making sure that we can deliver the service that we are undertaking to provide, answering those calls 95% of the time in 5 seconds or less. So this is a bit of a breakdown, and I forget, Julie, which side of the Fraser Valley this is. This is Abbotsford. And I think the numbers, if you were to look at the Chilliwack side, would be very, very similar. So you can see really we've got that baseline from 2013 of 53,000 calls offered. That's how many calls we took on your behalf. And if you fast forward to 2022, you see a significant increase up to 73,000. And then the other variable, of course, in that mix is the handle time has gone up a little bit. So what we're trying to do is stepwise our way to a point where we can actually bill the appropriate amount to make sure that service is maintained without giving you sticker shock each and every year, because I know that it's a challenge for all communities, and we hear that loud and clear. We're going through the same challenges ourselves, but we do need to make sure that we do have a resource base that's necessary to recover a significantly increased call volume. And I think the reality is that when we come to talk about next generation 911, we will see those cost drivers increase still further. And I see that for a couple of reasons. First of all, mobile technology. We have 80% plus of our calls now come in through mobile devices. Those are in everybody's hands, and I suspect some of you are carrying 2, and 1 or 2 of you possibly 3 different phones. So what's changed in the environment overall since the days that cell phones were invented? They used to be very scarce. And now when you go down Highway 1 and you see an accident, you'll see lots of people calling. We know when there's been an accident because our calls increase. So one of the things we're looking at with next generation technology is how can we make sure that we can measure demand and whether those calls are driven by the same incident, so we can lower the priority of those calls and deal with other calls coming in from other areas. So there's some games we're able to play with the new technology, but I'm positive that the call volume is going to go up. And because of the nature of information that will ultimately coming through to N911 on the NG911 system, we may see average handling times increase. And that will engage us in a really interesting conversation with agencies about the types of the data that they need to be more prepared to respond and where that information should be collected. Is it the 911 level, or should that information simply be downstream to the secondary agency and they deal with it? So there's more conversations to come for you as a regional district, for those of you who are members of municipal councils, your fire and police agencies, less of an issue, of course, for the BC Ambulance Service because it's a provincial service. All right. So we are working on new metrics for billing for 911 once we get into the next generation world, because it is going to be different. It's generally been a bit of a formula about call volume times handle time, and then a little bit of sort of other factors that are less heavy in that weight. In reality, what our board does at Ecom is presented with a budget by management, and it says, all right, that's your budget. And then it's left to our VP of finance and his team to kind of break down how the levies work. So what I understand we have billed, so what I understand from our finance department, what you have been billed is based on sort of this board approved levy for 911 PSAPs in that 8 to 12% range. The average increase was around 12%. And this is how this breaks out for the two divisions. We call them PSAP Chilliwack and PSAP Abbotsford. And that's how the finances break down. So you can look at your actual for 2022. You can look at what the board approved for our board approved for 2023 levy increase. You can look at the percentage of the increase, the dollar value of the increase, and what the levy invoiced by Ecom for 911 service for each of those areas has been. There, I know there will be questions.
Yep. Director Mercer, go ahead.
Thank you. What are is the provincial government under contract too for the provincial areas of BC? I'll use Chilliwack as an example. You know, you show Chilliwack as a funding partner, but for the provincial areas, does the bill come to the regional district? Or
It's regional district.
and then, if I may, through
Go ahead.
are we reimbursed by the province for the calls in the provincial area?
Ms. Kinnaman?
I think we'll turn things over to our Chief Financial Officer, Kelly Lonsborough, to answer that question.
Okay. Through the chair to Director Mercer, no, we're not, there's no reimbursement.
So I know this is for another day, Mr. Chair, but like as a regional district or a city, we're responsible for policing and for fire, but not for ambulance. So how is it that the province is not directly being billed for your efforts at Ecom when it comes to an ambulance call?
You're not
It
the
has
first,
nothing to do with.
yeah, you're not the first person to ask that question.
Okay.
And the reality is that the BC ambulance service has no agreement with Ecom. We do actually service aspects of BC ambulance's telephony system on our technology side of the house, but from the operational perspective, they're just a 911 client the same way a fire department or a police department is. And to put that maybe in a specific context, I know we focused a little bit about the ambulance call answer delays has been a driver for 911 service cost over 2021 in particular, and continuing in a very small way into the present day. But if you analogize that to say what some fire departments go through in major wind events or major storm events, they suffer from the same problem. Our call takers are trying to reach a certain department that can't answer the phone because their staff are already overwhelmed. So what's happening on the provincial scale with the BC ambulance is simply a much larger version of that same problem. But again, in terms of a callback from 911 with a municipal fire department as an example, we don't have the ability to bill them back. It's the regional districts that are on the hook under the way the province currently structures 911 service for all costs associated with operating them.
Thank you. Other questions? Director Barkman, go ahead.
Who sets the standard or the baseline to your service?
So are you asking about the 95.5 service level target? Yes. So that's a great question. That is, I'll try to sort of roll back the clock to 1999. That was a standard that was inherited by Ecom from Vancouver. The Vancouver City Police Department used to handle 911 for Metro Vancouver. That work came along with the Vancouver Department to Ecom in 1999, and that's been the standard for Ecom's 911 call answer ever since. Now, there are other standards across Canada and across the world. This is amongst the highest. Part of the reason for that is in some other jurisdictions, they'll have a different system. For example, they have a one 3-digit number for ambulance, one for fire, and one for police. So that speeds up the gap. So what we're trying to do with that very fast 911 call answer is make sure that we are answering that quickly so it can get downstream more expeditiously. It's not the only standard, but it's the one that we feel is the best for British Columbians.
Thank you. Other questions? Director Dixon?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This probably been asked many times. So you said, I think 80% of the calls come from mobile cell phones.
Yes,
And as far as I know, there's no levy or fee on it, like there's
Not
on
in British Columbia.
landlines. Are you part of lobbying for that, moving in that direction?
may I ask you to wait just for a couple more minutes and I'll be
Okay.
able to give you
course.
some news on that very point.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Director Gibson, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. You've alluded to this a moment ago, but my query is, what percentage of the calls are non-emergent and how are you addressing the trends there in terms of efficiency of the operation?
Well, I guess we have to sort of set our groundwork for what is emergent. What I might have mentioned earlier is in terms of the 911 call volume, we have a breakdown, which is essentially you've got a percentage of calls that come in for police. That's about 65% historically, 5% are for fire services, and the balance 33 are for the ambulance service. It's really not the job of the 911 operators primarily to determine whether it's urgent or not. When somebody calls and says, I need the police, there's not a lot of examination about the legitimacy of that request for the police until it gets to the police agency itself, and they're going to make the determination. Is that responsive to your question, sir?
Well, I guess there are probably a lot of extraneous calls. Now, you comment that they're not measurable. I understand that. But is there some process or some technology that can make the system more efficient to focus on genuine emergent calls?
We do have a lot of calls that are either abandoned or they're hung up. So in the current technology, if you were to place a 911 call and then hang up within fractions of a second, that call would not get registered. It would never be a 911 system. If you hang up and let it ring for a second and then hang up, it's considered to be abandoned. It didn't have a long enough lifespan to be answered. But anything beyond that, it becomes a 911 call. And then our policy set by policy setters like yours, because they're responsible for 911 service, will say, if you have an abandoned 911 call, this is how we want you to treat it. And in some cases, regional districts want us to call back that number once or even twice to determine whether there was actually an emergency. So for us, we have a high volume of calls that are into that category. They're either abandoned or they're hangups. And that does take cycles to determine whether or not there is any legitimacy to that call. So we are trying to work out a newer protocol with regional districts that provide funding for 911 to say, look, these are becoming a challenge. We need some guidance on how, for example, maybe one call back is enough. And if nobody answers, or if there are no signs of distress on an open line, that's the end of the story. Could there be somebody distressed at the other end? Yes. But if you look at the volume of calls that come through that don't seem to have any reality to them, it's a problem. But there's no way for us to sort out the fake from the real until we try to answer the phone. So I don't know that technology in the short run will be able to assist us. And if you can ask me that question again when we get into the next generation 911 section, I'll have an even more frustrating answer for you.
All right. Just one question too. When does your board approve the levy?
It varies. They try to do it late in the fall. In this case, it was earlier this year.
So it came sometime January, February when you guys approved the
I think
23 levy.
Yeah, I think it was approved by the board in late 22, and then the working out of the distribution was done by our finance team early this year.
Okay.
And it's my understanding that the regional district has already received the invoices that I was referring to.
Yeah, maybe I'll ask Ms. Lounsborough, I'll ask Ms. Lounsborough. So with a situation like this, when we're in the middle, obviously, of our budget cycle, and these unanticipated kind of levy increases come in where there's variation in what we're expecting. How do we deal with that when it's above? So it looks like they've given us a range, just 8 to 12%. Look, it's on the high. The actual is going to be 12%. Some of it we've heard already tonight is outside of our control. If the levy is arrived at by doing that I guess that multiplier, the average handling time, which we've heard already was exacerbated by some of the EHS issues, the province. So this has come in a little bit higher than what we've anticipated. So do we have surplus available where we try to offset, or what are we doing?
Thank you, Chair Lum. These figures, while I haven't seen the exact invoices, they might be in the process of approval. I will see them when due to the dollar amount. These figures are about $35,000 over what we have budgeted, because of course we do the budget at a different point in time and we hadn't had that information. So we do have surplus funds available. We have 341,000 of surplus funds at the end of 2022. However, last week in the committee of the whole, I did advise the board that our forecasts for 2022 were coming in quite a bit less. So while I say that we have the surplus available to absorb that $35,000, sooner or later we are going to deplete the surplus, and it will be sooner than later. And noting that this service area budget, this is for the initial call taking, is funded only by the landline, the levy. It's not funded by the tax requisition as our other budget for fire dispatches.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And I'll save the Collins or Levy questions for your next slides. I don't see any other questions. Go ahead. Yeah, you can.
I'm sorry, I thought we
continue
were
on. Yeah.
maybe waiting for one more question. All right. So NG 911. One of the reasons I was eager to join ECOM, had I known about the heat dome, I probably would not have made the choice that I did, but nobody had a crystal ball, is this technology that we're going to talk about. I wouldn't have chosen this moment to roll out next generation 911. There's so much else going on in the world, but the reality is next generation 911 has been mandated by the CRTC. It is a replacement of the existing twisted copper pair telephone network that currently carries 911 traffic with an IP-based and internet protocol-based system that is currently up and running in British Columbia in the hands of TELUS. It's federally mandated. All of us have no choice. We need to go along with it. I am usually asked why ECOM is doing this, why we're choosing this moment. The answer is I'm not. I am in some ways probably as unhappy as you are about the timing of it, even though I do see the efficiencies that the system offers and the enhancement to public safety. The technology that we're currently using is aging out. It's over 30 years old in many places. Some of you will have read about various outages across the province over the course of the last year and a bit. Some of that is caused by natural causes, bridges washing out, telephone poles being taken out by cars. One case of beaver eating its way through a cable. But in other cases, it's equipment failure, and it's equipment that there is no replacement for on the open market. So it's time for an upgrade in any event, and this will be a major leap in that direction. Timeline is pretty tight. It has been deferred once by the CRTC in recognition of the impact of COVID, but right now there is no suggestion that the March 4th deadline, 2025, is going to be changed. So what that means is we have a network live in British Columbia. It went live March 2022. That's the TELUS network. They're the provider in both British Columbia and the province of Alberta. That network is there. We can get on it. We are starting testing. We're doing the work that we need to do to make sure that traffic will flow, not just to us, but also downstream to the agencies that we provide either call taking and dispatch services to, or those other PSAPs, fire departments, police services, and the BC ambulance service, so that that technology will work. There are two mandates that we need to meet by March. The first is voice. So really no practical difference, except that the voice traffic will be over digital rather than analog lines. And secondly, a thing called real-time text. And there are two versions of real-time text that will be required to meet. By the middle of 2024, it's what they call basic real-time text. And I know you're all thinking the same thing. You're thinking it's like texting when you're trying to figure out where your kids are, right? It's a little bit different than that. The word real-time is the giveaway. When somebody calls 911, it'll be an open channel on their phone. So the dispatcher or call taker will be able to hear what's in the background, but the caller will have an option to use text, but it's character by character. And those of you who might have been at computers a long time ago when we had dial-ups and modems at 300 baud and you could actually see the characters progress along your screen will know exactly what I'm talking about. We will be able to watch messages being developed, deleted, edited in real time. The benefit is for public safety, if you're deaf, if you're mute, you've got a way of reaching for help. You don't need a dedicated TTDY. You don't need a pre-existing, anybody with a handset, Android, Apple will be able to use this service. It will be transparent. It will be built into the operating system. There's no charge for using it. It will just be there if you need it. It'll also be helpful to people who are trying to hide and call for help because they won't be heard. So there are real practical benefits. The enhanced version, which needs to be in place by March, is the ability to call back the person using text, which won't be part of the real-time text when it first rolls out in April. So our plan in terms of rollout, we are building a team, we're doing the technology, we're trying to do the acquisition of technology that we need. We've got many contracts that we need to sign with providers to give us equipment, to give us software, to give us the things that we need to do to get this thing up and running. And time is frankly quite tight. We are planning to onboard agencies and regional districts to the NG911 system next year, because we need a length of time to do so in a structured way. We don't want to throw one big switch and hope that it works. We want to be able to say, okay, we're going to bring on a regional district and its subordinate police and fire services. We're going to test it out with the BC Ambulance Service. So although 2025 sounds like it's a long way away, it actually isn't. And I'll come to some of the homework I'm going to ask you to do as members of this board shortly. The other aspect of the timeline is it's when the end comes, March 4th, 2025. The rules currently say that TELUS will be permitted by the CRTC to decommission the existing 911 lines. Any community that has not transitioned to NG911 will lose its 911 service, unless the CRTC authorizes TELUS to continue to run the line, and those communities that are still relying on it will pay what may amount to a multi-million-dollar bill in order to maintain the legacy system. So the reason I'm flagging that for you is to recommend that you all put some focus on getting ready to do NG911. It's a statement in my interest in terms of if we need to continue to take your 911 calls, we want to be able to partner with you and onboard you as quickly as possible. But regardless of whether you're ultimately an e-com client for any call taking or any dispatch services, you really need to go down this path.
Go ahead.
How's BC doing in comparison to the rest of the country?
You know, that's a hard question to answer, because I think that we are ahead in some ways and behind in others, and others are further behind in some and further ahead in others. And we do have a fairly robust dialogue with other large-scale emergency communication centers such as ours. We are sharing best practices. We're trying to figure out, are we doing things the right way, in the right order? What's your experience been with a certain service provider, a certain technology? So there is communication ongoing. I'm not aware of anybody that's clearly at the finishing line, province by province.
Thank you. Director McElhonick.
So even in my area, we're not that remote, but we don't have cell service in a lot of areas. So, and I know that's a particular problem in all sorts of areas in BC. So how do we get around that?
It will be. I know that provincial government, and I won't speak for the provincial government, I'll simply say that provincial government, particularly through the Ministry of Citizen Services, is working to roll out connectivity to more and more remote areas. They recognize the importance of that connectivity, not just as a public safety matter, but as a way of just the way in which people now live. If you don't have connectivity now, NG911 will not bring it to you. It's got to run on an existing network that TELUS is building up. So if you don't have a way of reaching that network, whether it's a landline, a voice over IP protocol, or a handset, whether it's cellular or satellite, you still won't have any connection.
Director Davidson. Got you on mute there, Director Davidson. Sorry.
My apologies. With Starlink's low Earth orbit technology, either rolling out in the US or heading this way eventually, will the NG911 operate on that kind of low bandwidth service?
The short answer to that question is my understanding is yes. But it won't be in the same way. There'll be some gateways they'll be required to make sure the signals get handled properly. And I'll maybe ask Julie to speak briefly to an issue that's close to her heart at the moment. Many of you may be aware of an issue that's developing with Apple, one of Apple's latest devices, the iPhone 14, and its crash detection. And it's a great concept, but it's resulting in some challenges for 911 service providers. And maybe I'll let Julie speak to that for a second if you want.
Sure. Thank
Thank you, everyone. I like to say I'm Julie D. Decker, Director, Operations Relationship Management, but it's often all things outages, Julie D. Decker, and or Apple 14 crash calls, Julie D. Decker. So what I will say about that is that it's really great, part of a variety of different committees and working groups that are working towards coming up with some remedies in and around, in particular, the lately, and I don't want to even say the word outages, but they haven't been, I'm sure all of you have noticed, it's been kind of nice this last little bit. Not perfect, but not as bad as it was over the last, I guess, over the summer and into the fall. That said, we have seen an uptick in calls that are generated by the Apple 14 crash feature. So Apple 14, and I'm not a techie at all, just so you know, they have the ability to, it's almost like how OnStar, your vehicle, if you have that feature, if there's an impact to your vehicle, it automatically makes a phone call. They connect with you, they find out what the situation is, and you're good to go. But when it comes to the Apple 14 right now, we've seen an uptick, and some examples of that would be, say, in Whistler, for instance, and you might have seen some of this in the media. Where people that have like Apple Watches or have upgraded to the Apple 14, there is a feature in there that when people are skiing, you hit, you know, you fall, whatever it is, it's auto dialing 911. So you can imagine up in Whistler with fire departments trying to get up on gondolas to get to a certain place where these calls have been generated from, and finding out that it's actually just somebody slipped and fell or you know, dropped their phone. This actually was brought to my attention initially from, I believe it was Richmond Detachment, RCMP Detachment. They have their airport unit that was also receiving a number of these calls that were generated by people dropping their phones in the airport. And imagine the amount of deployment, the resources to get to those places, and the risk at times, depending on what who is responding, but you're often going code 3. If it's 911, you've got lights and sirens and you're going. Only to find out that these were people in the airport that had dropped their phones. Because I'm involved with other committee groups, we found out that even across Canada, we've seen places like Ontario yes, in Ontario, there were quite a few, as well as in some of the Amazon shipping incidents where their boxes are being dropped, and that has generated, if you can imagine, yes, auto dials. Okay, so more recently, we've seen some of these coming through to Ecom, and you know, as we see more and more people upgrading their phones and everything else, we probably will see an even greater uptick with the number of these events. We are in conversations with Apple. In fact, one of the committees had someone from Apple come and just give us a presentation on what the feature is for and why it's there. So again, this isn't a push feature on the phone. It's one that's automatically auto dialed as a result of impact. So you know, we've been working with police, fire, and ambulance on this, and also with Northern 911. Northern 911 is the rest of the province that Ecom is not delivering 911 service for. And just really getting even way more information than I ever thought I would about how these Apple satellite GPS calls, push button calls, and or crash calls are being managed through routing companies, big ones in the United States, and then various contracts. But suffice to say, we've been in conversations around this. It'll come back to the 911 policy that we have, where we believe this would be an auto dial. So with that, it would primarily go to EHS first. As it stands right now, there's gaps, and some of these calls are coming directly into various fire departments in particular, and it's causing quite a bit of havoc for people. Even when I spoke with BCHS, you're talking to them and they have concerns themselves about going to these scenes, code 3, to find out nobody's there. Then is it going to be generated to police as an abandoned 911? So there's a variety of pieces that have to come together. We're working diligently to get everyone connected. I actually think we are getting there. We will have more to give you with that. But, you know, further to what Stephen mentioned, and I know you mentioned about your area not getting the self-service as it is right now. We do know that there's work to be done across the province, even in terms of the geospatial mapping piece for NG 911, because the cool part for various agencies will be that I always like to say it's almost like the matrix. It's how I relate to things, where you're able to zoom right in to where that person is, where that call is coming from, in that building, on that floor, that type of thing. But there is a lot of infrastructure to happen around that, and all areas would have to be covered in terms of the mapping piece. But as Stephen mentioned, and it's unfortunate, I think when I first came aboard, I did have people asking me the exact same question, like, is NG 911 going to bring us cellular coverage? And it's unfortunate, but it's not. That's just not the way it is right now. I know that, like Stephen mentioned, the province is looking at it and we're doing what we can. So I don't know whether you wanted me to talk about anything else or I can wait till afterwards. But on the outage piece, I'm also on that working group. We have a working group that has all EHS, fire, and police represented, ECOMs represented, and we're looking for ways to bring forward recommendations to the province, who we would ask to then bring forward our recommendations for action to, say, TELUS, for instance. They've been contracted for NG 911. You know, right now it's not sustainable. There's the human factor involved right now is really people like me answering calls at 2 o'clock in the morning to try to fan out outage notifications. And then, you know, you have to wonder if the power's out and all cell services down and landlines, you know, we might be looking at pigeons at one point here, because I don't know how people are going to get the outage notifications. So it has been frustrating, I have to say, but I do know that we are in the working group that we have together is definitely going to make progress. I believe that the recommendations will be sound. We have people who work with the CRTC, so we kind of have a very good understanding of what's required to push these recommendations forward. The ability to remove the human factor will be a big deal, but you know, the other piece of it is notifications can also diminish you know, public safety, the thought that the public feels safe and do they have access to 911. These things, outages have been happening for years. It just seems to be the perfect storm where we've had more prevalent incidents of this. And we will see this as we onboard more and more with NG 911. And that's why we're taking this very seriously, to see that if there isn't a way for everyone who needs to know about these outages as soon as possible. It is so critical. For us, it's always access to 911. Public safety is critical to everyone here, and certainly for our work. And so that would be probably the best update I can give you on that one. We have had a couple of meetings already. We've got a bit of a criteria identified. And like Stephen said, I mean, we've had beavers, we've had copper thieves hitting fiber that have caused outages. We've had motor vehicle accidents. These are things that we know that have been elevated for a variety of reasons, especially with the heat dome. Certainly when people don't have access to 911 and further to the heat dome, I would like to mention a couple of things. Our people received 2 awards from APCO with respect to how they manage through the heat dome and also for training. The teams that work through the heat dome, understanding that they're not medically trained and being on the phone for hours with people trying to get through to EHS. You know, we did lose a few people as a result of that to long-term illness. You know, whatever we can do to support those people on the floor is what we need to do. We get into from heat domes which was unexpected for everyone. And obviously it didn't come with a pot of money for everyone, just like NG and a number of the other social issues we see out there. But further to that, we see more of these weather events. You know, we had the wind dome in November. We had a summer that went right through to the end of October. So we had more fires happening. It was a drier, hotter summer. We also saw in November peaks in volumes that went beyond what we saw during the heat dome or, you know, on Halloween for New Year's Eve. So the call volume being managed, and what Stephen mentioned is, you imagine everybody's calling in or trying to get a hold of people, and how do we roll out more and more communication when the systems are down because there's power outages and that sort of thing. We're working with BC Hydro as well. But we're also looking at various policies across all of the tri-services, police, fire, and ambulance, to address how we can deal these mass calls holding situations. So there's lots of work to be done, and I probably shouldn't take more time. Anyway, thank you.
All right, Mr. Thatcher, I'm going to give you your 5-minute warning because I still have to
All
feed the
good.
directors tonight, and I don't want you to not have enough time to give us the good news portion of the.
Yeah, I wouldn't leave without doing that. So just gonna see if this will pick up. This infographic is really representative of where we're going in this NG911 journey, right? So if you look at the top line, that's where we are today, either basic 911 or enhanced 911. NG911 will be voice, real-time text in 2024 into 2025. And then the years beyond that, it'll be much, much richer. We'll be getting into streaming audio, streaming video, telematics from vehicles, information about your health from your smartwatches, the ability to add artificial intelligence to help us manage calls, to manage response. I'll just give you 2 quick examples. You can imagine that if you're an ambulance crew or a fire crew and you've got a report of a car accident, a picture of a rollover student or a school bus is probably more helpful than a report of a school bus in the ditch. If you're a firefighter, the fact that we've got a building of a certain size with certain types of smoke at a certain height is diagnostically valuable. The firefighters will have that information before they even arrive at the scene in many instances. So one of the things we got to do is say it's great technology. It will enhance public safety. The growth and the expectations have to be managed. Who's doing the work, what technology will be deployed and which will not, are all going to be topics for conversation for primary PSAPs, secondary PSAPs, and the agencies that they serve. All right, I'll skip this. I want to get to local government agreements. I mentioned earlier that local governments, including regional districts, fire departments, police departments, BC Ambulance Service, anybody who provides PSAP information is going to have to sign an agreement with TELUS. And that lays out a certain set of rules for what the local government authority is responsible for and what TELUS is responsible for in return. ECOM cannot begin the process of onboarding any of your agencies and any of your communities until your regional district signs with TELUS. And I know that work is currently underway. It's called an agreement. It's an interesting term because it's really a bit unilateral. The terms are set by the TRCC, just happen to have TELUS's name at the top. I think the good news is there's no tariff levied on regional districts or other agencies for signing this document. It simply binds the departments and the regional districts to certain obligations. And this is a summary of some of them. It's not all of them. What I really want to highlight probably is GIS. Graphical information system data is critical. If we are going to get the right resources to the right place at the right time, mapping data is critical. And where it becomes particularly challenging is in developing communities, First Nations communities that don't have the mapping capability. That mapping is very expensive, but it's a requirement for NG911 rollout. So I just wanted to flag that on the time that I have left to make sure that those maps are up to date. It matters which agency responds and is part of the agreement. And you'll see that TELUS's obligations to you are a lot lighter. It is a little bit of a one-sided deal, but it's important that your agencies, whether it's at the regional district level or your municipal or district fire departments and police departments, are aware of their obligation to sign. We can do nothing to bring you on board. We can do nothing to send you 911 traffic until you've signed on. All right, I'm trying to end with a little bit of the good news. And something that starts with anticipated financial impact is not a way to start, but I promise you the end is a little bit brighter. We have already started spending money on your behalf in order to make sure that we are NG911 compliant and can take those 911 calls sometime next year, and definitely by the definition date of March 2025. However, we will not be charging you for that until next year. So we're working out some levies, we're looking at some forecasts. Some of that was communicated to you in early 2020 or mid 2022. We're refining those numbers as we go along. I think the good news is generally those numbers have gone down rather than up as we've worked on refinement. So you will not be billed anything until next year. And then we're looking at a 5-year recovery. So we'll amortize the costs that we're currently incurring and will be incurring to roll out next generation 911. And then we'll do a bit of an assessment and a reset in 2029. All right, so where's the good news? I know you're all asking that. All right, this is it. We have worked very hard at ECOM in partnership with regional districts, local municipal governments, district governments, provincial politicians, to put some pressure on the provincial government to assist at least in some way with the financial impact that rolling NG 911 out will take. And I can say that I think that message has been heard by the provincial government. ECOM is reasonably optimistic there will be some relief from the provincial government, perhaps announced in the next couple of weeks as the budget rolls out, that will lift some, if not potentially all, of at least your NG 911 cost transformation off your shoulders. Now, that's not a guarantee from Stephen Thatcher. It's certainly not a guarantee from ECOM, but I can tell you that a lot of advocacy has been done. I think the provincial government is alive to the costing implications of communities, particularly those that are smaller, and the fact that they don't really have a choice. If they want 911 service, they have to invest. So my hope is that the government will come through in large measure, but I think we all accept even the small measure of financial support for the NG 911 transition.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Thatcher. And look at that, 5:45. You're right on time here. So we'll take a couple of questions, but just in the interest of time, because we do have our regular board meeting to go. Director Mercer, go ahead.
Thank you. Just quickly, when I listened to your president speak in Whistler in the fall, he talked about the notion of the call taker at ECOM saying 911 emergency, police, fire, ambulance, or mental health.
Yes.
And I was just wondering where that is in the
So great question. We have engaged actively in government, several ministries with respect to the mental health question. I think there is a broad consensus that there needs to be a single number to call for mental health assistance. The challenge I think at the moment is that those services are very disparately governed. Some are provided municipally, some provincially, some are done by volunteer groups. There might, even if we created a single number to call, the fact that it would have to be downstream to different organizations with different levels of staffing, different operating hours, different ranges of services, makes the picture very complicated. So I will say that we're in early discussions with the provincial government and other organizations about what a model might look like. ECOM's happy to be part of that model, but I think there's going to be a little bit of road to travel before we get to sort of a uniform mental health number.
Thank you. And lastly, and really quickly, no indication for the federal government is this is a federal government download,
No.
if you will.
Nothing from the federal
Nothing
government.
from
And
the
if you look at
feds
what's
with-
happened in other provinces, other provincial governments have stepped up to cover all or part of NG 911 funding. Slightly different models.
All province, no fed though.
Yeah.
Thank you.
BC is now really the outlier, and which is why I think I'm reasonably optimistic that there'll be some change.
Director Adamo. Got you on mute. You're off mute on my screen, but I think it's probably just your headset, maybe. We'll circle back and maybe try and encapsulate your question and forward it through to Mr. Thatcher. Any other questions, board directors? Nope. Couple of quick comments. So this board might be aware that I was approached a couple of years ago to sit and assist with some advocacy for ECOM's efforts with the province, and so I know that we've had some pretty robust conversations trying to share some of the challenges with the province. One of those key challenges is that we're still quite unaware of what exactly some of those costs are going to be in terms of even upgrading the downstream PSAPs, like to be able to be compatible. So ECOM sounds like you've got a better handle on the idea of what your tech is going to need to get upgraded to be NG 911, but I don't know that all of the smaller communities have that same handle. So it'd be very, very helpful to us to work together to try and figure out exactly quantifying all the costs. So up and downstream. So not just you guys, but what we can expect to see in terms of obligations for us to upgrade our equipment. And the second thing is obviously the call answer levy, the diminishing call answer levy money is a huge challenge that funds that piece, as Ms. Lounsborough said, which is already chewing into surplus here as the demand grows. So we're definitely going to want to see movement from the province in relation to that. And then thirdly, and I'd like to explore this, and I've spoken about this a little bit, but what authority, if any, would a regional district, say, have in terms of if we're required to sign on to this fairly, as you said, one-sided contract with the service provider, TELUS in this case, what authority would we have is to turn around and, in the absence of a provincial call answer levy, just create our own levy and send a bill to directly to the service provider to offset some of these costs?
I've been asked variations of that question, and I think the reality is that's a question for your council and not for Ecom.
Yeah, or maybe just a question of doing it and
seeing what happens.
And seeing what happens. So, okay. Well, I don't see any other questions, but the challenge is very real. We're alive to the fact, our staff are very alive to the fact that this is coming down the pipeline for us. But as I said, very concerned about getting a better handle on what those costs may be for our downstream systems as well. Okay. Thanks very much for being here. Thanks for the time.
Our great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Kinnaman, are we going to recess?
Yes,
For,
I think that would be ideal. We'll recess till 6:15.
Perfect. That's moved by Director Pranger, second by Director Facio. All in favor, opposed, if any, were recessed. Everybody had an opportunity to get some dinner. Appreciate all the staff that put that together for us. Thank you very much. Felt like Thanksgiving dinner or something like that there. So thank you very much. And I'll call the meeting back to order. Ms. Kinnaman, next item.
Item 5.1 is the draft Fraser Valley Regional District Board meeting minutes of January 26, 2023.
So moved, Chairman. Moved by Director Clute, second by Director Facio. Any questions on the minutes? Hearing none. Director Facio, you don't have a question on that though, right? Nope. Perfect. No problem. Just checking. Hearing none, all in favor. Opposed if any. Item carries. Be remiss if I didn't welcome two directors to the table tonight. Acting directors Dreesen and Reed are here, and thank you both for joining. Welcome. Next item.
Items 6.1 through 6.5 are committee minutes for information and matters arising. Happy to separate any of those items out.
Thank you. Questions from directors? Seeing none. Next item.
7.1 is the FVRD 2023 to 2027 financial plan. There is a motion for your consideration.
Thank you.
So
That's moved by Director Facio, seconded by Director Mercer. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor and opposed, the motion carries. Next item.
8.1 is the prohibition of fireworks, which is a motion for which notice has been given by Directors Castle and Wardenberg.
Thank you. And that is moved by Director Castle, seconded by Director Wardenberg. And discussion.
I do.
Director Wardenberg, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to say we've that was brought forward by some residences that we should actually look into so the sale and the use of fireworks in Area C, Corey Castle in G as well. From some residences kind of border to both areas, and there was some comments due to endangering animals. It was mostly because of the fire danger in our area, because we are in a very rural area, and and during that dry spell that was very close to Halloween last year, it just amplified the dangers of having the fireworks being for sale on the highway. I do want to say one thing. I look forward to the staff report on this, and I am very aware that we are not looking to regulate the sale on the First Nations land, but we are definitely looking into what we can do as far as the bylaw in our areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Wardenberg. Then I've got Director Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I do have a couple of questions, and I'm not so sure I'll be supporting this tonight. And the questions really are, what is this, if anything, bumping off the work plan? Because I understand that, certainly understand what they're wanting, but every time we come forward with a new activity for the staff, it pushes something off the existing work plan. And we have a strategic planning session coming up, and that's just where I'm leaning. It just feels like this is one more thing for staff to do, and I'm just curious who can be responding to that.
Ms. Kinnaman.
Thank you very much for the question. I see that we have Graham Danilus online, the Director of Planning and Development. Perhaps he can speak to staff's ability to absorb this work into the work plan, or if it's something that we're going to have to shift off.
Mr. Danilus.
Oh, thank you very much, through the chair. I appreciate Director Dixon's comment. We do have a very aggressive work plan for the year. That said, staff could accommodate bringing forward a report. I believe it'll be a relatively brief report that'll provide a scope and review legislative options for the committee and board to consider, potentially for implementation in a future work plan, say in 2024.
Thank you, Director Horn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
the one question I had was been answered by Director Wardenberg about sale on First Nations lands. The second question is through the chair to staff. In terms of enforcement capacity, I'm certain that the report will think about this, but we've run into this challenge in Mission frequently. $5 fine, I know, Mr. Chair, but where we have a bylaw, but we can have very little capacity to enforce it because people are lighting these things at times of the day, or in situations where we just can't deploy a bylaw officer to go and enforce the bylaw. So it's actually in some ways created frustration. I guess my question is, if the motion passes, would the report take a look at the practical and financial realities of trying to enforce such a bylaw?
Skinnaman.
Through the chair to Director Horan, absolutely, that's exactly what will be addressed in the report. As you have pointed out, there are challenges in the enforcement of these kinds of bylaws, and particularly for regional districts with large geographic areas.
Director Mercer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just through the staff, and Mr. Danlos perhaps, but I'm not sure how much work there would actually be because all of the information you require already exists. I think I can count 10 municipalities that have had the legal opinions and all the work done. It, for me, becomes down to the ability to enforce it. But I think all the research for a report is already done. You could just change the title.
Through the chair to Director Mercer, I do believe actually this issue has come before the regional district in the past as well. So I believe that's why Mr. Danilus is quite confident that preparing the report won't be too difficult or cumbersome for staff for this year. But in terms of going forward with any kind of a program, that would have to go into next year's work plan.
And I think just with Director Horn, the comment, couldn't agree with you more, but by making something prohibited by way of bylaw, it does take care of some of the people who follow the rules, but you will never catch everybody. Excuse the pun.
Thank you. Director Adamo.
Thanks through the chair to staff. Is there a way to include any other areas in this? You've got C and G listed right now, and B would like to participate in this as well.
Skinnaman.
Through the chair to Director Adamo, any report that would come forward would ideally include the possibility for any electoral area to be included. I think that in the past we've had different initiatives come forward and certain electoral areas would like to opt out. So even though that the motion that was brought forward jointly by these two electoral areas, certainly the rules would apply to you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Don't see any other questions or comments, so I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Next item.
9.1 is the Chair and Mayor's Committee. There is a motion for your consideration, but I guess in advance of that, I note that there's a verbal report. I just wanted to identify that this new committee arose through the request of a couple of mayors at this table and working with Chair Lum. We had a recent meeting with that group, and they appointed a chair of that committee, which is Director Horn. And just the only other thing that I wanted to point out was that it was decided that this committee will meet sort of in conjunction with the Fraser Valley CAOs group, which meets quarterly, so that there will be a nice alignment between all of the initiatives that are happening at the various member municipalities, as well as in our electoral areas. But I don't know if Director Horn wanted to comment.
Yes, thank you. I'm happy to, through the chair, to add a couple of things. We timed, as you said, CEO Kinnaman, the meetings, because we also wanted to make sure it tied into the capacity of municipalities, and very mindful of questions such as that asked by Director Dixon here a moment ago about how does this sort of help us to work in a coordinated and efficient way on things that are in the work plans of multiple municipalities and of the RD. The three areas that were identified initially were working on strategic approaches to creating an employment land supply, connecting the area through transportation infrastructure, and being a consolidated voice in flood recovery and prevention. but we also recognize that there may be opportunities for us to respond in an agile or nimble way at the call of anybody from around the table that becomes aware of things. For example, we will use each meeting to learn things about what communities are doing to address issues such as homelessness. So I think at this point it's nascent. We're going to evolve and report out, but I think our attitude is we'd like to try it here and see if we can make value out of it for the community, for all of our communities.
Ms. Kinnaman, we don't have a motion on the floor. Should I move in a second here and continue discussion? So can I get a mover and a seconder on the sentence? Moved by Director Smith, second by Director Horn. And further discussion. Director Castle, you have your item.
Thank you, through the chair, I think maybe to Director Horn. I wasn't going to ask this question, but Ms. Kinnaman referred to the interests of the electoral areas. How do the electoral areas play into this, as there's no representation from electoral areas on this committee?
I think that the voice at the table, that's the conduit for electoral areas, is Chair Lum. And so as well as to the CAO, who will be there as well. So where the initial structure we're suggesting is that, because it gives us the most agility, but we think that that gives the most opportunity if electoral areas want to bring something through EASC or through this body or through a communication directly to the chair.
And further to that, Director Horn, there have been other structures set in place in other regional districts or in other places that didn't include the regional district representation. My view on this was that having being invited to this table, my sole focus would be to find a way to be a conduit through, and whether that's regular meetings with EASC or a selection of electoral area directors if and when issues arise. As far as I'm concerned, I'm at your disposal. So both, I think it would go both ways, also communicating back through this board to the ongoing kind of discussions and workings and how they overlap and interrelate with the regional district, regional services, and electoral area director issues. Certainly it wasn't my intent to go in speaking about what I think electoral area directors would wish to see raised. It would be to listen and pass along when required. Director Siemens.
Thank you. And I think the intent is to have a collaborative way for municipalities to work together on economic development, like we were talking about industrial land challenges. So I don't believe that any decisions will be made there that will not, any decisions that are made or recommendations would go to the board. And so this was, in essence, I guess from my perspective, you know, there's always been a lot of competition between various municipalities for economic development, and you know, one area gets this, another, and we're competing. Oftentimes that's kind of a race to the bottom. And so I think working together, there is going to be industries that make more sense to be located in Chilliwack. There's going to be industries that make more sense to, you know, to be located in Mission, maybe Hope, depending on you know, some people want to maybe have closer to air or border. So, you know, instead of competing against each other, it's a way for us to work together. And so this will be a conduit for that. So any decisions that are made or recommendations would still come to the board. So it wasn't meant to be a cumbersome and too restrictive, but it was a way to maybe bring us together a little more collectively.
Director Davidson, I see a hand.
Thank you, Chair. Question through to staff. Is there an expectation that this new committee will require staff time? And if so, what service area would be funding that staff time? Thank you.
Through the chair to Director Davidson, this is a standing committee of the board. And so the staff time that would be involved would be myself and the corporate officer, who will take minutes and prepare the agendas. that would be the extent of it. I think that occasionally there could be times when, depending on the subject matter being discussed, we might have to call in staff from both the Fraser Valley Regional District as well as the member municipalities, depending again on that subject.
Thank you. Just one comment, Chair.
Yep.
Mixed emotions on this one. It feels like a club that electoral areas are helping to fund, but aren't invited to. But I'll defer to others who wish to make any comments on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Davidson. Other Director Horn.
You know, and I understand the sentiments that have been expressed in that last comment. I think I would ask of the board to give it a chance to bear fruit over the course of the next year. What it represents is the bringing to bear of CAOs and teams in each municipality. It represents a degree of political clout that can move agilely and coordinate with this table, and sharing of knowledge. It was sort of inspired by a couple of initiatives, one very informal where myself and Mayor Popov sat and really shared lessons, including with some of the senior admin from Chilliwack and Mission around homeless initiatives that have borne fruit for us already. So that learning really paid a difference. And myself and Mayor Siemens sat and spoke about the many ways that our two communities benefit by working in partnership and coordinating things like transit, recycling, and other shared services, and keeping the doors open for others down the line. So I think I would ask of our colleagues that they give us an opportunity to bear out the model, and if it needs refinement, you have, I think, this committee's promise that we'll be open to that.
Thank you, Director Horn. Further comments? Don't see any. Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Next item.
9.2 is the FVRD privacy breach policy. There is a motion for your consideration.
Thank you. Mover and seconder. We'll get it on the table. Moved by Director Clute, seconded by Director Mercer. Discussion, Director Dickey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd ask if the board would support referring this policy back to the East Committee to give us a chance to get a better understanding of just what is encompassed in the policy. Thank you.
Thank you. So a motion to refer back is moved by Director Dickey, seconded by Director Johnson. Just check in to see if there was not discussion on referral, but just a further substantiation that you wanted to share on why, or just to get more information, just for our staff to be able to prepare a little more.
Yeah, just looking at the policy as it's stated in the staff report, sounds like a very, at least to me, a complicated document. And I'd like a better understanding of just how that might impact the electoral area directors going on in the future.
Very good. And I'll call the question on this referral back. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Motion is referred. Next item.
10.1 is the 2023 grant and aid application for the Deroshan District Community Association and electoral areas C and G.
Thank you. It's moved by Director Castle, seconded by Director Wardenberg. What do you know? And any questions? Hearing none, all in favor. Opposed, if any, item carries. Next item.
10.2 is a 2023 grant and aid application for the Lake Eric Community Association and electoral area C.
Thank you. It's moved by Director Wardenberg, seconded by Director Castle. Discussion. Hearing none, all you're okay?
I do have a comment.
Sure.
To the chair. I just wanted to point out, this is you've seen the staff report, but I just want to clarify that this is a one-time deal. This is for water testing at the lake. They've done it before, but in the future it will be done through the Ministry of Environment, and won't be funded through the Area C Grant and Aid Fund. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Wardenberg. Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, all in favor. Opposed, if any, item carries. Next item.
11.1 is the Fraser Valley Regional District Dudney Community Water System Service Area Amendment Bylaw number 1684.
Thank you. It's moved by Director Castle, second by Director Clute. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor. Opposed, if any, item carries. Next item.
11.2 is the Electoral Areas E and H Bylaw Update Project.
Thank you. Motion number 1, first reading is moved by Director Dixon, seconded by Director Gill. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor, opposed if any. Item carries. Second and third readings moved by Director Smith, seconded by Director Pranger. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor, opposed if any. Item carries. Next item.
11.3 is the Fraser Valley Regional District Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 1648 to rezone 4 privately owned properties adjacent to Coquihalla River Provincial Park in electoral area B.
Thank you. That's moved by Director.
So
Adopt.
moved.
Perfect. Seconded by Director. I need an EA on this one. Director McElhonick. Discussion. Nope. All good. Call the question. All in favor. Opposed if any. Item carries. Next item.
11.4 is the zoning and official community plan amendment to facilitate a 3-lot subdivision at 12845 Sylvester Road in electoral area F.
Thank you.
Davidson, moving the motion in the agenda to give no readings and deny the applications.
Okay, so this is moving. It's a little bit separate. Yeah, no, it is staff recommendation, seconded by Director Dickey. Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Opposed? The motion carries. Next item.
12.1.
Negative there, sorry.
12.1 is the 2023 LMLGA resolution. There is a motion for your consideration.
Thank you. It's moved by Director Dixon. Yes. Seconded by Director Pranger. Discussion. Okay. All in favor? Those if any, item carries. Next item.
12.2 is a policy to capture funds for the FVRD community parks and trails through development applications.
Thank you. It's moved by Director Horn, seconded by Director Mercer. Discussion. Director Horn.
So just a question through you, Mr. Chair. At this point, we do not then have any community, community amenity contributions at all to the RD. Is that correct?
Ms. Kinnaman.
I see Graham Danilus is on the line. We wouldn't want to let this one go by without him getting a chance to weigh in. If he could comment on that, that would be great.
Mr. Danilus.
Thank you. Through the chair. FVRD doesn't have a community amenity contributions policy that applies across the electoral areas, though we do work through development approval processes to obtain community amenities, but it's not under a formal and consistent policy, which is the gap that staff are proposing to ultimately address here.
Thank you. Don't go off mic, Mr. Danilus. A follow-up if it's okay. Do we have a parkland acquisition policy where either parts of properties are dedicated or cash in lieu is dedicated?
Mr. Danilus.
Yes, we do have policies within our electoral area community plans that identify park needs and set out policies for either acquiring property through the subdivision process or for taking cash in lieu. And additionally, we have policies that support an alternative process that accepts voluntary contributions essentially in lieu of cash in lieu to provide more a flexible funding mechanism for trails and park amenities as opposed to the acquisition of parkland only.
Thank you very much. And that leads to my comment, Mr. Chair, which is this is what I didn't know this didn't exist, but it is vastly overdue. And it's standard operating procedure for us in municipalities. And in fact, I think we're leaning into it further and asking for contributors to think about whether or not in-kind contributions are in line with strategic needs in those communities that have been identified. For example, improvements in parks, or we hear often about things like fire hall improvements and some of the things that are community grant applications here. Though in any event, I look forward to seeing this come back, and I hope that it will include a dexterous approach where if staff feel they want to navigate through a negotiation process where an in-kind contribution could be estimated in value and brought before this board, that would be wise. For example, I'll give you an example, a medical space where a modular offices for doctors can be used, for example, is something we've looked at in our community.
Thank you, Director Horn. Other comments? Don't see any. Call the question. All in favor? Opposed, if any. Item carries. Next item.
12.3 is a Crown Land Transportation Use Application Referral at Sunshine Valley in Electoral Area B.
Thank you. It's moved by Director Adamo.
Yes.
Seconded by Director Johnson. Discussion. Hearing none. All in favor? Opposed, if any. Item carries. Next item.
Moving down to item 14, which is items for information and correspondence. Happy to separate any of these items out.
Thank you. Few items here. Just check in with directors. If there are any questions. Director Davidson, see your hand.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to speak to 14.1.
14.1, go ahead.
So outdoor recreation management plan, with outdoor recreation management and promoting it, it kind of walks hand in hand with the risk of over tourism, and we've seen that risk become an issue in some areas. When I'm looking at the report that comes with the plan, and it speaks to the history of it, the working group formed in 2017, and the members of that working group basically saying that included the formation of a working group comprised of local Indigenous nations and organizations, federal and provincial agencies, and the FERD's member municipalities. It doesn't look like, I'm just trying to get a better understanding of how electoral area concerns around over tourism have been represented to date in the formation of this draft that the report speaks to.
Thank you, Director Davidson. Ms. Kinnaman, is Mr. Urban here?
Mr. Urban is here, and I'm sure that he would love to answer that question.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair to Director Davidson. Yes, what you're reading in the background section is the context for how this came to be. And at that point in time, the emphasis was on destination marketing, and there's been a major shift since then. We're now in a phase of destination management. And with that comes exactly what you're speaking to. We've seen what COVID's done to the outdoor recreation space and the uptake of use, and it's gone up. And as a result, the discussion is now around carrying capacity. How do we manage? How do we handle? And the plan that we're proposing here is a resource tool that can be used by the land managers to help guide and inform those kind of issues that you speak about.
Mr. Urban, can you maybe go a little bit further on how electoral area directors' interests, I think was the language that Director Davidson used, were represented at some of the tables? I know you've been there. I know it's been a bit of a mix because some of the DMOs actually have partnerships with electoral areas that participate in the destination management. So for instance, Tourism Chilliwack in the Chilliwack River Valley, Cultus Lake, that kind of thing. But just from your perspective, how are you acting as a conduit through to this table from the RD and the electoral areas, I guess?
Sure. I think through the chair to Director Davidson on that aspect, the role that we serve as the integrated planning and engagement team is just that. We bring together all the different departments, and it's a process then that I use, and one where we've been able to work together with planning downstairs, regional programs upstairs, and as well, as you mentioned, we've got our destination management organizations that are reflective of some of our electoral areas. It's a lens as the FRD that we bring for electoral areas, and that's incorporated in. A good example would be this plan created 13 recreational management units, and those units are encompassing of our electoral areas, and they're based on a watershed scale. So EAs are part of this because they're part of the watershed and therefore part of a recreation management unit.
If I could just further add as well, The plan is to bring the draft outdoor recreation management plan to the board in April, along with a more fulsome presentation around the plan. It is a very lengthy document, so this is just to whet your appetite a little bit. And then that will kick off an engagement period where the full board, including the electoral area directors, will have an opportunity to review the plan and provide comment.
Just a follow-up, Chair.
Go ahead.
So that's fine. That kind of follows a normal process. However, I can't help but observe that by the time these things have reached a draft stage, they've acquired a certain amount of momentum. And especially with a lengthy document, sometimes that runs in inverse proportion to the willingness of this board to discuss it, or any board to discuss it before somebody decides it's time to call the question. So I am concerned about, essentially, it sounds like EA concerns going into the draft being represented by proxy. Because I'm not really seeing a connect back to the community level type of engagement. And it sounds like the opportunity for that won't be until later. And again, I just have concerns that it sounds like it's come a long way without a direct line to the electoral areas. So, thank you.
Thank you, Director Davidson. Did you want to further comment there, Mr. Urban? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you through the chair. So another aspect that I would like to speak to is we went out to the public and we engaged with the residents of the regional district, and that includes the electoral areas. We had open houses in 3 of our communities. As well, we hosted online the ability to provide input, and we had really good geographical representation from constituents all throughout the region. And I think I'm confident that we have electoral areas input coming in through the local residents as well.
Thank you, Director Dickey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just in maybe bolstering the arguments Director Davidson has presented. So we always, electoral area directors, I think, tend to look at the municipalities as having the population and the electoral areas having the real estate, especially when it comes to outdoor recreation. And clearly the electoral area directors have a lot of interest in this question. I just wonder if the plan were to go to East prior to board, giving the EA directors a chance to have a look at it prior to the board level.
Ms. Kinnaman?
Through the chair to Director Dickey, we will bring it to EASC and RACS in April.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Horn, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, if we're finished with 14.2, 14.1, my question is about 14.5. So
go ahead. Yeah, I don't see any other comments on 14.1. Go ahead.
To you, to staff, this is responding to or looking at the letter from the chair of the Thompson-Nicola Regional District, and that regional district's concerns about the Recycle BC stewardship plan. I just wanted to know whether our staff have had a look at it and will have any concerns, or whether we can expect a report in the future on this. The letter goes into essentially a number of points that describe rising costs, lower results. And so I'll pause for a question and see if there's further comment.
Ms. Kinnaman?
I'll take a kick at it and then maybe turn things over to Stacey Barker and her team. Typically, these are letters that come around just in advance of UBCM advocacy without this board's direction to bring a report on any particular item that comes forward. As you know, we receive quite a number of these through the first months of the year. I have seen this item in different versions at the UBCM resolution session. I suspect that there will be this one as well as several others this year. I don't know if there's any new information that our environmental services team wants to speak to on this one.
Parker.
Thank you.
Typically, issues like this are brought forward to our solid waste working group that we have. Member municipalities are represented on that staff working group. I can follow up with our environmental team to ensure that that was discussed. And if not, we can send around. We typically gather comments from a staff across the region, consolidate those and put those forward, as well as our own input as well. So if there needs to be representation from comments from the FURD, we could do that from a staff level and then bring that forward to the board.
Thank you. That is what I was hoping to hear. Is as CAO Kinnaman said, I couldn't initially parse this from one of those typical get ready for UBCM or LMLGA type letters. In this case, it was a little less clear as to whether there were specific fundamental issues with the stewardship plan that we might need to look at. So that's appreciated from Ms. Barker.
Thank you, Director. Any other comments or questions on items for information correspondence? Don't see any. Next item.
Moving down to reports by board directors.
Thank you, board directors. For your opportunity, Director Facio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of brief reports here. Last Saturday at the Memorial Hall in Harrison, we had the Variety Children's concert sponsored by Tourism Harrison and entertainment by our famous Todd Richard and his guests. It raised $5,000 and $1,000 was donated by the Harrison Fire Department. As probably most of you know, but something is happening in Harrison in May of this year, the LMLGA at beautiful Harrison Hot Springs. So I believe registration is now available. It's the 3rd to the 5th, and looking forward to see all of you there. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Facio. Director Dixon, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank the board for supporting the draft the resolution that's going forward to LMLGA, in spite of the fact that I almost missed it on the agenda because I was reading an email about the very thing that we were just voting on. So apologies for that. But this is an important issue, I think, across the province. So thanks very much for staff for putting the resolution together and the board for supporting it.
Thank you, Director. Director Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. On February 7th, I was invited by Kanakabar First Nations in Lytton to attend WAWAM. This is a project to create a process for emergency management networking, including building a resource list and sharing contact information for working collaboratively across communities and with regional service providers. And I want to say that I appreciated the input and the involvement of our FVRD staff and board members that participated in the Local Government Leadership Academy seminar that was held in Richmond. And then this coming Saturday, I've been invited to attend both the landfill and the Land Society meeting. So I may have something to report on that next month. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Johnson. Director Horn.
3 things, Mr. Chair. First, on Tuesday, I was honored to be informed that I've been named to sit on the board of BC Transit along with the mayors of Victoria, Souk, and Smithers. So we'll have a Fraser Valley voice on BC Transit, and I'm looking forward to that orientation process and advocating for services that serve our region well. Number 2, the Hatsik Lake Watershed Table met again and received a letter from Minister Ma indicating that the ministers of emergency management and climate readiness, as well as infrastructure, were interested in what we were doing and the collaborative nature of it, and in coming to visit with us. Since we have at that table resolved to send out an invitation, which has been sent, and in fact, we broadened its scope and have actually been asked by the Ministry of Environment if they could also be invited. So it has gone out to the Ministers of Agriculture, Land, Water, and Resource Stewardship, EMCR, Ministry of Environment and Infrastructure. So more on that later, but our hope is that likely, if everything works out well in April, we'll host them for a tour of some of the things that are happening and to one of our meetings at which we see We see representatives from this board, Director Davidson, Director Council, Chair Lum, and some of our staff have been voices at that table. And finally, following up on a letter I CC'd to the board here last month, I have heard from 2 fuel companies. One was a brief letter. The other gave me an hour of their time and walked through a rather robust presentation of how they arrive at pricing in our region. And I can give you a summary of that, which is to say, concerns about the way fuel is priced in our region are, in my opinion, legitimate. A lot of it is not happening at a corporate level. And so in terms of presenting to the Competition Committee or BCUC that the prices are not a product of collusion, that question is, I think, addressed. But the question of whether or not the local region has a different model or whether independent fuel sellers have the opportunity to do more of a process of gathering, capturing gains on days where there's an opportunity to do that, that does bear out from the information I received. In our community, there were 8 days last year where we paid more than in Maple Ridge, despite the fact that there's to be a 13.1 cent difference based on the surcharge, and another number of days, probably 25 or so, where the price was compressed below 13.1 cents. I'll continue to speak with colleagues here and think about whether we have a role in doing something around this, but I would say to consumers, the larger lesson for us is in being advocates to those fuel companies and those independent and second stream retailers, for example, the 7-Elevens and so forth. Tell them what you think, because right now there is some legitimacy to the idea that they're catching up from the fact that there have been fuel cost issues. They're passing it on to you.
Thank you, Director Horn. Director McElhonick.
Just a couple of items. Be attending the second stakeholder meeting for rural homelessness out in the Chilliwack River Valley. So it was started by the Indigenous and local RCMP, and it's well attended. I did get a chance to meet with MLA Padden as a follow-up on our meeting with the BC Housing Minister, and I'm hopeful for good news in the near future. Met with the Chilliwack Fish and Game Club. They've applied for a grant for some bigger generators for emergency services, and I provided some support for that. And I have a meeting set up with to tour Ford Correction Center, and something that I learned that I thought was quite interesting is that some of the work that they do there is they repair fire hose for the province. Throughout the province, and it saves the provincial government a couple of $1 million a year. And they also repair fire equipment, like basic equipment. So I think that's pretty interesting. So I'll probably put that in my report I put out to the residents. And the other thing is in my other role on this Saturday, we're going to be having our coldest night of the year walk to support those that are homeless, hungry, and hurting. And we have a fairly high number of people that are experiencing homelessness or precariously housed in Chilliwack. That's the win.
This
Yeah.
Saturday, we've got a train track running across the roof that I'm not aware of.
Yeah, so yeah, so this is something that for those of you that are in the community, I really do hope you come out. Councillor Shields will be there, MLAs Coulter and Padden will be there, and to help us kick that off, as well as one of our board members, Jessica Steiner, who has a law firm here in town. And you know, it's the stuff that doesn't get paid for by any level of government that is really needed sometimes. And we provide a lot of service to a lot of people. Our outreach office, you know, 1,500 to 2,000 people a month come through those doors. And we can't do it by ourselves. We really do need your help. Great cause, great team, and hope to see you out there. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Adamo.
Thanks very much, Chair Lum. I've had a great productive 2 or 3 weeks, other than having a bit of a cold right now. So I apologize for not being there in person. Had an opportunity to meet with the Yale ratepayers once again, and that's become a regular visit. And a lot of great things happening in Yale right now as they prepare for their summer season as well, and the influx of additional traffic that they have some concerns with. So I've also had an opportunity to meet with Staff Sergeant Dwayne Farland, and we've basically discussed a new program, and we're working on a few things with regular dialogue now with all the concerns through different areas of Area B. I'll be meeting with the Laidlaw representative, Mr. Hans Mulder, next week to discuss the development of a new ratepayer association for the first time in Laidlaw. So we're really looking forward to getting together, and we've had a lot of issues that they'd like to discuss and see where we can come together on a few things. Met yesterday with Matt Wheelick and David Urban, Matt being the president or the general manager of the Cascade Lower Mainland Forestry Commission. So we had an opportunity to discuss a number of things and some of the logging issues that'll be taking place in 2023 and some of the legacy programs that can also be coming from a result of that. And then, of course, just a real big thank you to our own association up here in the Sunshine Valley. Our Christmas festival, or our winter festival rather, on the 18th was a huge success. We had new snow, we had the ice rink was going. Neil Diamond drew about 250 people that evening, and then the following fundraiser that took place for the fire department raised $3,300. Compliments of all of the people that participated. So a big thank you to the community for showing up, and all of our sponsors and volunteers and the Ratepayers Association and our community club. So thanks to everyone for that. And that's it.
Thank you, Director Adamo. A live and intimate Neil Diamond concert draws in Sunshine Valley. Very good. Other reports from board directors? Seeing none. Oh, sorry. I see Director Wardenberg. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing for Area C. I just want to congratulate the Stahelis First Nation on their they broke ground. Well, they didn't break ground, but they started the site prep for their new medical clinic on the corner of Morris Valley Road and the Loweed Highway. So it is probably one of the biggest projects in Area C, and congratulations to the chief and council. A job well done and a long time coming. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Wardenberg. And I see Director Gill.
Thank you. I had the chance of attending my first Fraser Bison Council meeting, and there was a bit of orientation for 2 days, which went well. I'm excited to learn the role, and then also on March 3rd, Tourism Mission is holding a Shine, or March 3rd, 7 to 9:30 in downtown Mission. Tourism Mission is holding a Shine Bright just to honor some businesses and first responders in Mission. So everybody is welcome to come. It's a free event. One thing you have to say is Mission to enter.
Thank you, Director Castle.
Thank you, Chair. And just to respond to Director Gill, they're going to have a fabulous MC all the way in from Desroches to MC the big event in Mission on Friday night. So I look forward to seeing you all there.
Thank you, Director Castle. Okay, next item, Ms. Kinnaman.
Chair Lem, if you give me leave, I realized that I very quickly jumped over item 15, which is reports by staff. I just wanted to take a quick moment to introduce the board to our newest staff member, which is Sam Piper in the back there. Sam has joined us as the manager of communications after a very wonderful career with the city of Chilliwack, and we're just delighted to have her on board. So you'll be seeing more out of her office in the communications department in the near future, but welcome, Sam.
Welcome, Sam. Let's say she hit the ground running, because there was a few things right off the hop that we had to get Sam's help on. So appreciate that very much. Next item.
So now we move to public question period for items relevant to the agenda. We don't have any members of the public here with us in the boardroom this evening, but we'll just turn things over to our corporate officer, Jamie Van Ness.
Van Ness.
Good evening. So we have not received any letters submitted to us with any questions, but we do have two members of the public that are joining us by Zoom tonight. This will be your opportunity to ask a question relevant to the board agenda. And if you do have a question, to just hit the raised hand function to indicate you have a question.
Thank you. And any members of the public? I don't see any raise hand
No, it would appear
functions
there's
jumping out at me. So
no
next item.
questions.
Looking for a resolution to close the meeting.
It's
So moved,
by
Mr. Chair.
Director Fascio, second by Director Pranger. All in favor, opposed, if any item carries. And we're closed. I don't think
Now we will shift.
do we?
If you just give us a few minutes, then we will shift over to the hospital district meeting.
So we've done the land acknowledgement at the top of the meeting already. Does
It's worse than what you said. Yeah, I know. I was sworn to secrecy on a bunch of that. And what it looks like is that gas stations themselves got greater than
Do we give it a couple minutes or do we?
So Chair Pranger, whenever you're ready, we can get started.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Lum. You can start things with a bang. Call to order the open meeting of the Fraser Valley Regional District Hospital Board.
First
Ms.
item.
Kinnaman.
First item is approval of the agenda, addenda, and late items.
Move, Madam Chair.
Second, Director Clute. Those in favor, contrary, carried.
Item 4.1 is the draft Fraser Valley Regional Hospital District Board meeting minutes of December 15th, 2022.
Director Mercer and Director Lum. Those in favor, contrary, carried.
Item 5.1 is the 2023 Hospital District Annual Budget Key Assumptions. There is a motion for your consideration.
Director Horn,
Move option one. Sorry, move option one.
is there a seconder for option one? Director Gill, any discussion? Those in favor, contrary, carried. Reports from, oops, I'm doing my.
It's
district
quite all right,
event.
Chair Pranger. You just keep going with it.
No, Ms. Kinnaman,
Looking for reports from board directors.
seeing none. Next item, please.
We move down to item 8, which is public question period for items relevant to the agenda. Again, we have no members of the public here in the boardroom, but we will just turn things over to Jamie Van Ness.
So for members of the public who are joining us by Zoom tonight, this would be your opportunity to ask a question relevant to the hospital district board agenda and just hit the raise hand function if you do have a question. And it would appear there's no questions, and we can move on to the next item.
Thank you. Then we have a motion to close.
So moved.
Director Fascio, Director Schmidt. Those in favor, contrary, carried.
Okay, and then we'll just recess for about 3 minutes while we set up the room.
It's really strange.